University of Otago Pharmaceutical Sciences Senior Lecturer, Dr. Shyam Das. Welcome to the program.
Kia ora.
Wonderful to have you on. So how did this idea come about to make sanitizer for campus needs?
Well, as you know, hand sanitizer is very important at this moment to reduce the spread of microorganisms and save lives. We can stay home, but we need to also maintain hygiene. We need hand sanitizers. I struggled to get something in Dunedin. I went to 5 shops. I couldn't find any. So I decided, because as a pharmaceutical scientist, I have that skill to make that solution. So I decided I would do it. I would help the community doing this. So I formed my group with my research students, 5 PhD students and 1 honor student. And I discussed this with the Dean of the School of Pharmacy, Professor Carlo Mera, and he immediately agreed to help me. And I informed the university. University told me that, they need more than like a huge amount if I can help them. So that's the beginning. So I ultimately produced, before the lockdown, I produced more than 100 liters.
100 litres, right.
More than 100 liters. 100 liters I gave to the university, and around more than 20 liters I gave to my colleagues and students in pharmacy students. So, and then later on, the last Friday, the university informed me they have already given to civil defense and police, fire and emergency, and St. John approached the university to help them with this essential solution now.
Right. We're running out of time, Shyam, but this sanitizer is to World Health Organization standards, yes?
Yes. Yes, I follow the guidelines of WHO guidelines, which they published in the website.
Well, very good. Well done. Mike?
Yeah, well, Dr. Das, you should continue good work after COVID times as well, because some of those Otago University students need a good bath from time to time, so hopefully they can continue using it, sir.
Dr. Shyam Das, thank you very much for your time. And maybe, Nikki, send some of that sanitizer up our way as well, 100 litres made for Dunedin campuses there. And isn't it an example of New Zealand ingenuity just pitching in and being able to help?
Yeah, it's a lovely story, that one. I saw that earlier in the week and thought, yeah, that's so nice and just very practical. We all want to do practical things, don't we? And getting back to the hand sanitizer being the same price as champagne, which I haven't actually seen, but I haven't, to be fair, even tried to buy hand sanitizer. Wouldn't you much rather have the champagne right now? I would.
Well, yes.
And a little warning too.
Absolutely.
A little warning. I saw a photo the other day. Somebody had sanitized their hands and then gone to a gas stove and lit the flame and suffered an awful injury. So do be careful too around open flames. Yeah.
All right, both of you, thank you very much for being with us. Nikki Bazant, Mike Grehu. On the panel this afternoon with me, Wallace Chapman. I'm back tomorrow. Checkpoint next. See you later.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E Haere Akine, a leading epidemiologist, warns MPs the lockdown might not be enough to eliminate COVID-19. 58 new or probable coronavirus cases brings the total to 647. 74 have recovered. There are now 14 significant clusters of the virus in New Zealand, 9 more than yesterday. The government announces supermarkets will close on Good Friday but open again on Easter Sunday. A checkout supervisor tells us what it's really like on the front line with abusive customers. Up to $5 million of chilled meat is headed to the landfill if independent butchers can't open within the next few days. And Kiwis living in Australia are glad they'll get emergency payments.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. No mai, haere mai. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. The criteria for COVID-19 testing have been relaxed as the government wants to increase rates across the country. MPs were told today being in lockdown isn't enough to eradicate the virus and more action is needed on testing. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says not enough is being done to get a true picture of what's happening, including the rate of community transmission, currently estimated at between 1 and 2%.
Not only is it too soon to draw conclusions on New Zealand's position as we tackle this global pandemic, we also don't yet believe we have enough testing to tell us what we need to know.
Jacinda Ardern says people will no longer have to have the travel history or known close contact to be eligible for testing. Personal protective equipment such as masks will be given to frontline care workers to help them feel more safe. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says he's rolling out the gear to more people, including in-home and disability support workers, as well as staff at charities and pharmacies. Dr Bloomfield says frontline workers' concerns have been heard.
So we're undertaking a process at the moment of releasing a large number of masks from our national stocks out to our district health boards, and they will be distributing in their regions masks to frontline health workers in a range of organisations.
Ashley Bloomfield. Supermarkets will be closed as usual on Good Friday, but will be able to open on Easter Sunday. The decision was made after Cabinet ministers, who had a range of views, including religious ones, met to discuss the issue. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says it was about striking a balance between giving supermarket workers a break and having time to restock shelves.
In the end, the important issue for us was that we wanted to avoid people rushing to the supermarket if there were 2 days of closure, which would defeat the work everyone is doing to try and reduce people's contact with one another.
Jacinda Ardern says supermarket employees will be able to volunteer to work rather than be rostered on. The police have received almost 10,000 reports of suspected lockdown breaches. A website was set up to divert traffic away from the 111 line after more than 2,000 people called to report rule breakers last week. As of midday today, the website had clocked up 9,600 reports after crashing just hours after it was launched on Sunday afternoon. The authorities are clear that if it's an emergency, you should still call 111, but must visit the police website or call the non-emergency 105 number for lockdown breaches. 1 week into a nationwide lockdown, and the Civil Defence Director says there's a few things people need to stop doing. People congregating in outdoor places like parks, beaches and in urban areas is one of them. Sarah Stewart-Black says people also need to stop taking their children to playgrounds and schools where there's lots of surfaces they can touch. The Kiwi tradition of passing something over the fence to the neighbour is also a no-no. She also says people shouldn't be flushing away wet wipes.
Unfortunately, disposing of wet wipes down the toilet leads to extra blockages in the sewer network, and this includes flushable wet wipes. So the bottom line is, if you'll beg my forgiveness, please always put wet wipes in the rubbish and not in the toilet.
Civil Defence Director Sarah Stewart-Black. Business confidence has slumped to near record lows as the COVID-19 virus begins to hit hard. ANZ Bank's monthly business confidence survey shows sentiment plunged to a net 64% pessimism, with all key activity indicators sliding. Its chief economist, Sharon Zollner, says the slide in confidence points to a severe recession. Indonesian police have blamed the West Papua Liberation Army for a shooting which killed a New Zealander yesterday in Papua province. Graham Thomas Wall, a 57-year-old employee of mining company PT Freeport Indonesia, was among several people shot in Timika. Johnny Blades reports.
2 other people were seriously injured in the attack, which took place on Monday afternoon at Freeport's office in Timika. Police have blamed a faction of the West Papua Liberation Army led by a local commander named Johnny Botak. Police and Indonesian military personnel are hunting for the shooters who fled into the jungle. The incident is in the same regency where the Liberation Army had claimed responsibility for recent deadly attacks on police and military connected to the lucrative mine operations. Called Johnny Blades, Tēnei.
It's 5:04. To sport now, and the International Cricket Council has confirmed the South African-born Wellington Firebirds batsman Devon Conway will be eligible to make his debut during the Black Caps tour of Bangladesh should he be selected. The 28-year-old has been a leading run scorer in domestic cricket over the past 2 seasons, and he says finding out a definite date that he will be able to play for New Zealand gives him something to work towards.
I am pretty happy to hear about that, but you just got to keep working hard and and hopefully get an opportunity to break into that Black Caps team, which is pretty awesome at the moment. You know, you've got world-class players there, and it won't be easy to get into that team.
Devon Conway. And that's the news.
Creature comforts at home.
Stanley the Black Labrador, I should say, for people who are wondering about Stanley, is dutifully by my side.
Even if you're stuck inside sick.
One of the issues, obviously, comes up, around the bubble.
Are you
and we're
okay?
seeing
coughing there?
I'm absolutely all good. Thank you very much for asking.
Why not have a bit of fun?
Ultimately, he's just very excited to be out of the house and any opportunity to put a sporting cliche on something he can see in front of him.
Making the most of your bubble. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from mid-service to midnight tomorrow Wednesday, Northland to Whanganui, including Coromandel Peninsula. Fine apart from isolated afternoon showers. Patches of fog during the morning and evening. Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumarunui. Fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers today. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Taihape. Fine spells, scattered showers this afternoon and evening. Some heavy, possible thunderstorms. Manawatu to Wellington. Fine spells with isolated showers clearing this evening. Waitatapa, a few showers. Possible thunderstorms this afternoon, easing tomorrow. Marlborough, Canterbury, North Otago and Dunedin. Fine spells, isolated afternoon showers inland. Areas of morning and evening low cloud. For the rest of the South Island, long fine spells, isolated showers about the ranges this afternoon and evening. Occasional drizzle in the Chatham Islands. It's 6.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Paul. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Testing and tracing needs to be ramped up and more effort needs to be made to ensure New Zealanders returning from overseas are strictly quarantined. Senior government officials and the Health Minister fronted up via video link to an opposition-dominated select committee this morning established to play a watchdog role while Parliament is suspended. They heard from one of New Zealand's leading epidemiologists, Dr. David Skegg, who told them lockdown might not be enough to eliminate the virus. New Zealand has recorded 58 more cases overnight with 8 main clusters, bringing the total to 647. 74 people have recovered. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, filed this report.
Well, good morning. I think hopefully everyone is unmuted. Can I just welcome...
The normal business of Parliament has been transformed into a live stream featuring 11 MPs and the array of senior officials and government ministers called to appear before them. When people arrive at the border, they are quarantined and tested if they have symptoms or don't have a plan for self-isolation. Those with a plan are sent home and told to self-isolate, which means no leaving the home or any close contact with anyone. One MP asked all of Government Controller John Ombler if the rules were being followed, as he had heard stories about people popping out to the supermarket in contravention of the rules. Mr Ombler told the committee the police are carrying out regular checks on those at home.
Not all by any means, but a sample to ensure that there's a level of understanding and compliance. The feedback I've had is that, I haven't got the exact numbers with me right now, but generally that's been pretty good.
Epidemiologist Professor David Skegg told MPs New Zealand is well placed to get through this, but in order to eliminate the virus, the response needs to be stepped up further.
I think a lot of people think, it's great, we've got this lockdown, let's just relax for a while, but this is the very time we need to pull out all the stops.
This includes automatic quarantine under government supervision for all arrivals into New Zealand.
Because we all know that people may flout the requests that are made to them. So personally, I would much prefer that we do what Australia's doing and to quarantine all people arriving here now, and not to self-quarantine, but that they should be quarantined.
373 people arrived in New Zealand yesterday, fewer than half the total who flew in the day before. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the government is not just trusting people to stick to the rules, there is enforcement.
Anyone who is, after an interview, established that they have their own self-isolation plan, if they are found to not be complying with that, they risk a fine and they also risk being quarantined in a government facility. And so this is not just a situation where we're relying on people. We will enforce it. And we will enforce it strictly.
About 21,300 tests have been done so far, with the capacity now to do about 3,500 a day. The current testing criteria have now been widened to make it clear travel history or close contact do not have to be present. Community transmission is currently estimated to be between 1 and 2% of cases. Ms Ardern says she wants a much better picture of what's happening.
Not only is it too soon to draw conclusions on New Zealand's position as we tackle this global pandemic, we also don't yet believe we have enough testing to tell us what we need to know.
Government officials were also pressed on whether all health professionals and those working in the community have the protective gear they need. Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield says there are guidelines for the use of PPE, but the government recognises many frontline workers want the reassurance of having it available. So a large number of masks will be released to district health boards.
And they will be distributing in their regions masks to frontline health workers in a range of organisations, including our home and community support workers and disability support workers, some NGO workers where they have face-to-face contact, pharmacies and other providers.
And a final plea from officials: please stop flushing wet wipes, even the flushable ones, down the toilet, as they're causing major problems and clogging up the system. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Thousands of Air New Zealand workers are fighting to keep their jobs as the airline struggles with a massive drop in income. The national carrier expects income to slump by $5 billion after slashing 95% of its flights. The unions want the airline to tap into the government's wage subsidy scheme to keep workers on the books, but pilots say job losses are a reality. Sharon Brett-Kelly reports.
In just a few weeks, Air New Zealand has gone from a multi-billion-dollar operation to one earning less than $500 million.
It's just mind-blowing. It's just, as I say, beyond comprehension.
Irene King is an independent aviation commentator.
I've worked in this industry now for around about 40 years, and never ever this catastrophic.
In a memo sent out yesterday, Chief Executive Greg Ferran said Air New Zealand employs 12,500 people around the world at a cost of $110 million. Up to 3,500 will have to go, he says, is already talking to staff offshore. Unions are pleading with the airline not to rush into redundancies. Air2 Aviation Union organiser Savage says it will rip the heart out of the industry.
The risk at the moment is that the executive will rush in and they'll go hard and go fast on redundancy when actually they need to take the time and come up with some creative solutions. They need to take the time, use the wage subsidy that the government has offered.
The New Zealand Airline Pilots Association says job cuts can't be avoided. President Andrew Ridling is full of praise for the airline.
We're looking at, say, another month, I understand today, 5 weeks, and we'll be coming out the other side of that. What we need to do now is have a plan to rebuild our industry, to rebuild our economy, and to make sure we put all these good people, skilled people and their families back into work.
He says the airline will survive if New Zealanders start flying again, but international travel is a long way off. Here's how RNZ's business editor Giles Beckford sees it.
So it's going to be a very much stripped down airline, dependent totally on domestic services and cargo, with a little bit of cream from Australia.
Across the Tasman, Reuters reports that Virgin Australia is seeking a government loan of $1.4 billion Australian dollars. That would allow the government to take an ownership stake if Virgin was unable to repay the loan in 2 to 3 years. Other airlines will not survive. Willie Wilson is the chief executive of the International Airlines Group, which owns British Airways, Spanish airline Iberia and Aer Lingus.
But there are a lot of weak airlines who were struggling prior to this significant downturn, and I struggle to see how they will be able to survive, even with some government assistance. I think there were airlines that were chronically unprofitable before this problem, and I can't see them being able to manage their way through it.
Air New Zealand was not available to comment, but did put out an upbeat video about its cargo business featuring Chief Revenue Officer Cam Wallace.
We're sending a lot of things like honey, like fish, lobsters and dairy products up to Asia. And then to the Americas, we're working with some organisations in terms of getting medical supplies to market. And then there's a lot of products coming back into New Zealand. One, there's pent-up demand because we haven't had services for a while. And secondly, there's also medical supplies that New Zealand needs at this end of the route too. So it's a really positive exchange.
Not so positive is the future for hundreds of Air New Zealand staff. For Checkpoint, Sharon Brett Kelly.
It is 5:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback. Get in contact if you work for Air New Zealand. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. So what's it like on the front line of our supermarkets? Well, there's daily tears, racial abuse and in rare cases violence, according to one checkout supervisor. Customers have been warned repeatedly against stockpiling, but some shoppers continue to snaffle essential items, at times leaving shelves bare. And it's supermarket staff that are having to cope with some serious abuse. I asked one checkout supervisor who wanted to remain anonymous what it's been like working through this COVID outbreak.
Well, I've had a few bad experiences since COVID-19 came to New Zealand. We've had people throwing things at us, spitting at us, swearing at us, putting us down, calling us names, and being racist to us as well.
So has this been directed to you, or have you seen it happen?
I had a male come in, for example, and he threw a basket at me because there was nothing on the shelf. And I'm just a checkout supervisor. I don't work in that department because we didn't have anything on the shelf, obviously.
And what did he say to you?
He said to me, why the F haven't you got the stock on the shelf? You should have the stock on the shelf. And I went home crying that day, and I felt like I didn't get any support from anybody because I started crying right there in the middle of all the customers. One customer did come up to me and said that I handled it really well, and she said that she was so grateful for our work that we've been doing, but it puts a lot of weight on our shoulders as workers in the industry because we're going there to provide for the community and our family, but we're risking ourselves getting abused and stuff. And I literally cried to my partner and I said, I can't do this anymore. I felt like giving up so many times.
And so, did the basket hit you, or did you manage to get away?
The basket hit me.
That is appalling behaviour. And what other things have you seen as well?
So on the daily, there's staff members crying for all different reasons. It's mainly the abuse we get, whether we're not wearing a mask, no stock, the lines are too long, they waited too long, but we also get good comments as well. So I'm not going to say that every single customer is bad, but we get a lot more customers coming in now attacking us for something that we're just trying to do our job.
So when you say they are criticising you around the masks, is that because some of the workers don't wear masks?
Yeah, the workers aren't wearing masks, the workers aren't wearing gloves, the workers aren't sanitising their hands as much as they would like them to.
So this is what the customers think, is it?
The customers are thinking that.
Have you got safety gear where you are?
Well, apparently the Ministry of Health has advised us on a piece of paper that we aren't in our industry, we aren't required to wear a mask or gloves, but if it makes you feel safe, you can wear them, but you'll have to supply your own, which I feel is so not fair because in my belief, the employer has to ensure that their employees feel safe at all times, and if it means that they need masks and gloves to make you feel safe at work, I feel that we should get supplied those.
The supervisor says she's looking after her own children and her father. Her partner is also an essential worker. And she says she and her colleagues were struggling to keep up with demand.
We can't keep up. So it's so hard to even just get a break. We've gone 4 hours, 5 hours without breaks at a time. And there's workers working 12-hour shifts just to keep up. And even then, it's still not stocking the shelves fully.
So are people still grabbing stuff? You know, are they still stockpiling? What kind of stuff are they taking in bulk or trying to?
Flour, tin foods, long life milk, meat. Those are the main ones I can think of.
So they're buying up large on that stuff.
Yes.
Now, while I've been talking to you, a decision has been made that shops will close for Good Friday. So they'll be closed on Good Friday, but they're going to open up on Easter Sunday. What do you think of that decision?
Oh my gosh, I work both days. I'm thankful that we're closed on Friday. Hopefully people can have a break. All our workers deserve a break, and what I feel is that supermarkets should be closed on weekends. That's what I think. That's the kind of break we need to replenish our shelves, and that break will be good for us to fill the shelves for our customers and communities.
You've got the chance now to talk to your customers, and some of them, you say the bulk of them are doing really well, but some of them are badly behaved. What do you want to say to people who are coming to the supermarket?
Be kind. We're human too, and we're scared as well. That's what I want to say to all of New Zealand shopping in supermarkets. Be nice. Leave some for somebody else that may need it more than you do.
Hey, what do you think you'll do with your Good Friday off?
Oh my gosh, I'm going to sleep. I'm going to sleep and have a long bath.
And that is a checkout supervisor. Now, in a statement, the company says the level of abuse our team continues to face is incredibly concerning. And while they appreciate it is a time of huge uncertainty for all New Zealanders, taking frustrations out on supermarket staff is unacceptable, they say. On the subject of safety gear, the supermarket says even though the Ministry of Health guidance is that masks and gloves are not required, they have ordered a shipment for staff and those should arrive this week. They also say that their safety processes are being peer-reviewed by a third party. Now, some of you have got in contact during that interview. Claire in Otago says, the interview with the supermarket worker is heartbreaking. I feel so ashamed, sending so much aroha and support for all our frontline workers. Thanks, Claire. And someone else has got in contact to say, I feel really sorry for supermarket workers who are trying to help their communities and are as anxious as everyone else for their families at the moment. Unfortunately, this kind of behaviour many health workers face every day, whether there is a pandemic or not. It is not acceptable for any profession to experience this. Thanks for your feedback. Do keep it coming. Text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Up to $5 million of chilled meat is headed to landfill if independent butchers are not allowed to reopen within the next 5 days. Group Principal at the Aussie Butcher, Keith Oddie, says businesses that can't process or freeze meat stockpiles will have no choice but to dump it. Our reporter Robin Martin has more.
Keith Oddie says butchers stocked up ahead of the shutdown, believing they would be deemed an essential service, only to find out at the last minute they were not. He says independent butchers around the country have been left with millions of dollars worth of meat they can't sell.
Some shops, like a couple of mine, have got big freezers, you can freeze it off, but you're still caught with a lot of stock and a lot of fresh stock. Little small butcher shops wouldn't have those facilities, so they're in trouble.
So how much would you estimate is out there?
My group, probably $250,000, and if you go through the 150 butcher shops around Auckland, there'd have to be 7 to 8 million.
He says there's only a small window left to save the product.
They've reached the stage where they don't let us open. I thought they might have announced we could, but they haven't. And then a lot of it will be dumped to landfill.
So how long can you chill meat per se?
Can be up to 10, 12 days if it's not vacuum packed or frozen. And if it's a product that can't be vacuum packed or frozen, it goes straight to waste.
Mr. Oddie believes butchers with enough floor space to observe social distancing protocols should be allowed to reopen, initially for 4 days a week. Pippa Hawkins is the General Manager of Retail Meats New Zealand, which counts about 110 independent butchers among its members. Ms Hawkins says government communications around the shutdown caught butchers out.
They had their biggest days and weeks in the history of their stores, bigger than Christmas. And because of that, they stocked up significantly after that essential services was announced. And then obviously within a couple of days, that had been refined back to the supermarkets and dairies, leaving our guys with a lot of excess product.
Ms Hawkins says Retail Meats has been communicating with the government about the unintended consequences of the ruling, such as the welfare of pigs that had not been slaughtered, among other issues.
We've also got butchers who supply rest homes, we've got butchers who supply halal meat, which you can't get in the supermarket. We've got butchers who supply small towns that might not have access to a supermarket. So we're very much hopeful that we may get some answers on this soon. But there isn't an answer just yet, but hopefully something soon.
She says Retail Meats is still hopeful independent butchers can reopen before meat has to be dumped. Meanwhile, a Taranaki business, Texas Barbecue Foods, is offering to process and vacuum pack as much of the stockpile as it can, free of charge. Its chief executive, Ash Peters, says he'll then distribute it to charities.
We see that meat just sitting in the chiller and going off is an absolute waste, especially when there's so many people out there that the financial hardships that are going to be coming their way in the upcoming days is going to be quite devastating for them. We didn't want to see that go to waste. We wanted to see how can we capture that product, what can we do with it.
Mr Peters says he's had some interest from Taranaki butchers and is keen to hear from others. But Keith Oddie, while acknowledging the sentiment of Texas Foods' offer, says the uptake won't be huge.
Don't think there'll be a big uptake because butchers in essence are barred from their premises. So you can't go in and take it out according to the rules with a lockdown.
The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment says the more businesses that are open, the harder it will be to contain the spread of COVID-19. It says butcheries have been deemed non-essential as the products they sell can be bought from supermarkets. The Ministry says it continues to monitor what constitutes an essential service and these may change during the period of shutdown. Mō te hōtaka o te akiaki nei, ko Robin Martin ahau.
A lot of you getting in touch around the issue of supermarkets and essential businesses. This person says not to detract from the testimony of your supermarket checkout lady, but 12-hour days or 15-hour days, 5 hours between breaks is a regular occurrence within the health system. It's time New Zealand and the government realise the health system is broken. Nurses and healthcare staff feel undervalued, and this event just brings it into light how much the government undervalue healthcare workers generally. During the last negotiations, they said there wasn't enough money for health workers to have reasonable wages, and wage rises sounds like bollocks. We've got $12.6 billion now, this person says. Anne has got in touch to say, should we nominate one day called Use Your Stockpile, where people use what's in their cupboards and leave the supermarkets alone? With aroha to the steadfast supermarket heroes. Thanks, Anne. And this person says, I agree with your checkout supervisor. Go back to closing all shopping Saturday and Sundays. Have time with your family. The one you've just rediscovered in the last week, they say. Signing off with a smiley face. And this one says, supermarket staff fatigue, increased staff numbers ASAP. Many are looking for work. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, New Zealanders living in Australia are delighted they'll be able to access emergency payments. We speak to an American scientist working on an antibody for COVID-19, and exercise and social distancing. Who stays on the footpath and who hits the road if you're walking, running or cycling? Now, we love your feedback on this one. Does your bubble walk single file when another bubble approaches? Send your tips on etiquette when your bubble is out of the nest and moving. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Paul Brennan with the headlines.
Thanks, Lisa. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says people will no longer have to have travel history or known close contact to be eligible for testing for the coronavirus. New Zealand has recorded 58 more cases overnight, with 8 main clusters, bringing the total to 647. 74 people have recovered. The police have received almost 10,000 reports of suspected lockdown breaches. A new website, which was set up to divert traffic away from the 111 line, has clocked up 9,600 reports. Personal protective gear like masks will be given to frontline care workers to help them feel safer during the COVID-19 pandemic. Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, says he's not contradicting guidelines by rolling out the gear to more people, including in-home and disability support workers, as well as staff from NGOs and pharmacies. Australia has reported a sustained fall in the rate of new coronavirus infections. The rate of infections has slowed to 9% from a rate of 25 to 30% a week ago. Officials have urged people not to become complacent and stressed the need for further strict social distancing policies. Business confidence in New Zealand has slumped to near record lows as the COVID-19 virus begins to hit hard. ANZ Bank's monthly business confidence survey shows sentiment plunged to a net 64% pessimism, with all key activity indicators sliding. And the World Bank has warned of unavoidable and significant pain in countries across East Asia as economies contract in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. In a newly released forecast, it says the virus poses a big threat to the region's tourism, trade and commodity-driven economies. And those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to business now with Nona Peltier. Hi, Nona. Business confidence, it has slumped to record lows. Well, that seems not surprising. So what numbers are we talking about here?
Well, you may have heard in the news it was a net drop of 64% in overall sentiment. But what is most concerning is the business's own view of things. And in that case, we're down a net 27%. And that's significant because it really goes to the intentions of these companies to employ people, the investment decisions that they're going to make. And it was across all indicators. Most hard hit was the retail sector, which isn't particularly surprising. And so overall confidence had plummeted there. In some of the numbers, for example, their own activity was down a net 41%. That's huge. That's a collapse of 56 points over the last survey. Employment intentions down a net 23%. These are not very good numbers, probably as bleak as we've ever seen. And the interesting thing is that this isn't as bad as it's likely to get because this survey was done before the lockdown. So we can expect the next batch of numbers we get to be even worse.
Not great news, Nona. So what else has been going on the markets?
Interesting, the New Zealand market has done not too badly. In fact, the NZX Top 50 index rose 1.4%. Now, that's in contrast to Australia, which has been down about the same amount. Asia's looking a little healthier. They were, I guess, somewhat encouraged by some manufacturing data out of China, which shows it's doing not too badly. So that's eased and calmed some nerves there. Also, the oil prices have steadied somewhat. So yeah, not too bad. We were up 136 points to 9,797. Now, just out of interest, Air New Zealand came out, released an email to staff today. Their share price dropped 5.6%. But on news that some essential items that could be sold by other retailers other than supermarkets has helped some companies. One of them in particular is The Warehouse. It was up 5.5% today.
Okay, so those companies that potentially sell the whiteware, heaters and other items that you are going to be allowed to buy. So where did the dollar end up, Nona?
Okay, so the dollar was steady, which is also quite encouraging, at 60.2 US cents, 97.4 Australian and 48.7 British pence.
Good to see you, Nona. Thanks for joining us. That's Nona Beltier with our business news. New Zealand's largest company is emerging as a bright spot in the economic gloom. Fonterra Chief Executive Miles Hurrell says the co-op is in good financial heart and expecting to stay that way during the COVID-19 pandemic, avoiding job losses or sharp falls in revenue. He told RNZ's Guyon Espiner that Fonterra expects the milk price to hold around current levels and said that the company is even experiencing spikes in demand for some of its products.
Effectively, what you're seeing here in New Zealand play out with stockpiling of products in the supermarkets. We've seen that play out across a number of our markets around the globe, and we have quite a strong presence throughout Southeast Asia and China. So we're seeing consumers stockpiling, buying products as those countries go into lockdown. So that's been a positive for us, and of course our ingredients business, which predominantly supplies the large multinational food companies, which also have strong consumer businesses, are also seeing demand hold up quite strong. Where we're seeing some things sort of fall off a little bit is in that food service, and food services, that out of home consumption, whether it be a pizza or restaurant chains or burger bars or whatever it may be. We've seen that part of the business come off quite significantly. We saw it in China come off very quickly through February and in the early part of March, but very, very quickly we're starting to see that bounce back again. China, some of those big fast food or outlets such as Starbucks, about 90% of their stores are back open again, albeit on lower foot traffic. But we're starting to see some sense of normality. But that positive coming out of China has been offset by some negativity coming out of the rest of the markets, such as Southeast Asia, where we have quite a strong presence.
So on a net basis, when you factor in some of those markets that are falling away, or some of those product areas where things are falling away and others where you're seeing spikes, you think you're going to be able to continue with a similar sort of payout to farmers, a similar sort of revenue that you have been seeing up until now?
For the current financial year, which takes us through to the end of July, we still feel very confident in both the milk price and the earnings side of our business. So we're confident from that perspective. As we look further, those ups and downs are starting to weigh each other out. So therefore, you're in a situation where that does remain unchanged. But overarching that, I guess the global sentiment, how does that start to play its part? That's the bit is a bit unknown at this point.
How is the milk? How is the product? How is the powder going to keep coming across the border? Have you got any concerns about that?
As you move into the international markets, you are seeing shipping fleets start to get into a few issues around container availability and getting products into certain markets. That said, from our perspective, we've had a long-term partnership with Maersk Line, the largest shipping line in the world, and that's standing us in very good stead at this point, where we've been supported. All our products are getting to market, getting across the borders in our key markets. So again, maybe a little bit slower than what you'd expect normally, but as a city today, feeling pretty confident about our supply chain.
What is the status of the Fonterra staff? Do you have cases of COVID-19 in your staff?
But we have had some impact to people on our business. We've got a very small number that have been impacted and are supporting them the best we can.
Yeah, whereabouts are they, Miles?
We need to monitor their confidentiality at this point, Guyon, other than to say, they're not impacting our business. They've been isolated as soon as they become unwell and not impacting our business anywhere.
Yes. Is this New Zealand, though?
It may be New Zealand or it may be further afield. So we've got about 12,000 employees across New Zealand, and call it 8 to 10,000 around the rest of the world. So, statistically, half our people or thereabouts in New Zealand, you will see some cases over time.
Okay, what are your contingency plans? For example, someone gets infected in a plant. What do you do?
Being a food business, we obviously have very stringent controls in our factories. Actually, even prior to this, so we have what they call the red line, where you can't take any of your clothing that's been outside of the factory into a factory. Very clean and sanitised, and headgear and face masks. They're the standard in a factory pre-COVID. What we're doing now is ramping up things like temperature checks on arrival in our factories and for those small offices that are working, also ensuring that when tankers go onto farm, that there are no farmers in or around the milking shed. So a number of new measures that we've put in place, and at this point has left us in a situation where we have none of our factories are impacted.
Are you going to have to implement any job cuts, any salary cuts, haircuts for any of the executive team, anything of that nature?
It's not part of our thinking at this stage. As I referred you, we'd come off the back of a couple of ugly years, if I'm honest, Guy. We made some significant staff cuts in the last couple of years. No pay rises last year, no bonuses last year. So our business went through a significant reset. So we've been through that. It's put us in a pretty strong position, which enables us to be very strong. If we sit here and we're having a conversation in 2 years and this thing's still bubbling away, well, clearly we need to rethink how our business operates. But as I said here today, we're really proud of the fact that our people are getting up every day, are fired up, can make product and keep New Zealand moving forward.
And that's Fonterra Chief Executive Miles Hurrell talking to Guyon Espiner there. And we've had a lot of feedback coming in, this one in particular, regarding Air New Zealand and the redundancies that are on the horizon. This person says, I work for Air New Zealand. They are rushing through the redundancy process and they are already making mistakes. It will be mostly cabin crew who will be affected. While we worry about our jobs, we also worry about staying safe from COVID-19. There is enormous stress. A decent caring employer would have already grabbed the 12-week subsidy, then taken their time to work out the rest with less pressure. Also, there is a tendency for management to blame crew for catching COVID-19. Currently, 11 crew have tested positive so far, and that number will keep doubling. We do not understand why we were ever exempt from the 14-day stand down. The Ministry of Health guidelines need to urgently change because they are not keeping us safe. Thanks for getting in touch. We'll get to some more of your feedback later in the show, but keep it coming. Text us on 2101 and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. New Zealanders living in Australia are over the moon. They'll be able to access emergency payments being provided amid job losses due to COVID-19. It follows a plea last week from Jacinda Ardern for her Australian counterpart to help an estimated 300,000 New Zealanders who are not eligible for any sort of benefit. The payment is more than the $585 wage subsidy available here, but won't be available for people who had only recently started their jobs. Conan Young reports.
The $1,500 a fortnight JobKeeper payment is part of a $130 billion economic stimulus package and is available where an employer promises to keep somebody in their job. The fact it will also be available to New Zealand citizens is welcome news to out-of-work Melbourne chef Chris Ashton, whose boss was only able to pay him up until the end of next week.
Overwhelmingly relieved. I feel like I can make a plan going forward now, whereas before there was just no plan. There was just wait and see day after day,
Chris Ashton says the $1,500 will allow him to keep paying his essential bills until his restaurant reopens. He says making New Zealanders eligible for the payment is the right thing to do.
Kiwis come here to work. We didn't come here to go on to get benefits or anything like that. We came here to work, and we are good workers here, My boss really wants to keep me. My boss is very concerned to have me here on the other side when we reopen, when this is all finally over.
However, not everybody will be helped. New Zealander Matthew Cotton only started work as a chef on the Gold Coast in January. He's lost his job, but the scheme is only open to those who have been in their job for 1 year or more.
It's not like we haven't worked other jobs. We've been employed before those ones, so
kind of like I guess that I'd like to see more help for people and for me, like on my personal position, but yeah, it's a bit unfortunate.
Like 300,000 of his fellow countrymen living in the lucky country, Matthew Cotton is not eligible for a benefit. He can access his retirement savings, but says this is only a short-term solution. His dream of working in Australia may now be over.
It is something that's kind of in the back of my mind. I don't know how long the quarantine will last for, but maybe once it's all said and done, I might consider coming back to New Zealand.
The Oz Kiwi group campaigns for fairer treatment of New Zealanders across the Tasman. Melbourne-based spokesperson Lisa Cox says there are a number of desperate Kiwis out there wondering how they're going to make ends meet.
A lot of terribly distressing situations where people, they're only going to be able to survive for a few weeks with any sort of assistance, and looking at eviction and not having any money to put food on the table. They can't access any form of government support. It was a really dire situation.
Lisa Cox is sure Jacinda Ardern's plea last week is the reason New Zealanders have been included in the job seeker scheme.
I would say definitely it has, and the fact that she has been reiterating that Kiwis make the best migrants, they easily assimilate, they give back to the community in multiple ways, just quiet diplomacy to keep the pressure on.
Lisa Cox says the 1 month wait for payments to kick in will be tough for many, but she's glad that for now those renting are not allowed to be evicted for not keeping up with their payments and can instead use that money for food. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Konanyang tēnei.
It's 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. In breaking news, a second nurse at Queenstown's Lakes District Hospital has tested positive for COVID-19. 38 more staff will now be tested. We'd love to hear from you. You can text us on 2101 about anything you've heard on the program today. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Still interested in what it's like when you head out in your bubble. What etiquette do you follow? Despite calls from the Law Society to defer property settlements, some sellers are still trying to force buyers to pay up, even though they can't move house for the next few weeks. With almost 6,000 properties due to be settled during the lockdown period, the Law Society says parties need to renegotiate terms and not just for April settlements. Alex Perrottet reports.
Wellington property lawyer Chris O'Brien says for many first home buyers, the timing of the lockdown couldn't be worse.
They're concerned. A lot of them are buying their dream home. They want to move in, but obviously with the lockdown, that's not possible anymore. So we're just trying to figure it out on a case-by-case kind of basis and use a bit of common sense as well.
He says he's encouraging clients to follow the Law Society advice as much as possible.
There's two general approaches you could take. You could take a very narrow contractual approach and say, well, the contract doesn't contemplate this kind of situation. A deal's a deal, please settle in full. Or you can take a more common sense, practical approach and try and work something out.
Christchurch lawyer Duncan Terrace is the property specialist for the Law Society and says it's most probably illegal to move during the lockdown, so all parties should be putting that off.
It's technically illegal because under the state of emergency, you can only be out for essential purposes if you're a doctor, pharmacist, or shopping or going for medical supplies. Shifting house is not one of them.
But Wellington lawyer Finton Devine says some vendors who don't live in the property they're selling seem to want to push through with the arrangements as normal.
I've had other lawyers acting for vendors saying, no, we require your clients to settle. Current restrictions that are in place prevent the vendor from being able to give what's called vacant possession.
He says he researched British case law and found a decades-old precedent that ruled when vacant possession is available, but a law or regulation prevents the buyer from moving in, then vacant possession is not in fact established and the contract cannot proceed. He says he's acting for a purchaser who settled last Friday, but the seller ended up agreeing to compensate his client for losses until they could move in. But in another matter, it's the other way around. The seller is asking for compensation for their costs.
A contribution from from the purchaser towards the rates, insurance and mortgage payments that the vendor will have to make during that period. We haven't agreed to that yet, and I don't think we're obliged to, but I think as a reasonable accommodation, my client actually may agree to contribute something towards those costs.
The Chief Executive at the Real Estate Institute of New Zealand, Bindi Norwell, says everyone should seek legal advice as no two property settlements are the same.
And it's really trying to be as understanding as possible because it's really impacting quite a few people across the country. There's other examples where people have commitments in terms of, financial commitments as well, and it will cost them a lot of money if they do delay it. So I think, there are scenarios, and that's why it's so unique to every situation.
Duncan Terrace says for those extra keen vendors who would like to enforce the contract terms and threaten court action, it's not worth trying their luck in front of a judge.
Law Society can't override the contractual rights, and even the government wouldn't make, in my view, retrospective legislative change on it. But I do think going forward, those who have been unwilling to discuss, negotiate and just belligerently sticking to the letter of their contract may not be viewed that favourably in court if it ever went that far.
Duncan Terrace says it's unclear when the lockdown might actually end, and parties should be speaking to each other now to discuss a way forward if they are due to settle in the coming months. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
And apologies for some of the audio quality in Alex's story. Most of our Checkpoint and RNZ News team is working from home with both old and new technology. Home support workers are relieved they're in line to get essential protective equipment when visiting clients. The government's announced district health boards will be distributing stocks to frontline workers, including midwives, pharmacy workers, disability support workers and people who care for the elderly. Jonathan Mitchell reports.
Support workers and agencies have been lobbying the government to get the masks and gloves so they feel safe when on the job. 2 disability carers have caught COVID-19 and that spooked the sector. However, today, the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, said they were fast-tracking the distribution of supplies and DHBs would be giving them out.
They will be distributing in their regions masks to frontline health workers in a range of organisations, including our home and community support workers and disability support workers, some NGO workers where they have face-to-face contact, pharmacies and other providers.
Marcus Hutching is a support worker. He says clients have asked him and his colleagues not to show up because they don't have the proper protective gear, and clients want to protect themselves from COVID-19.
So it will be good for not only support workers but for clients, so the clients feel safe, and also we go from home to home to home. So also important us.
He says there have been shortages all round for the basic essentials.
Other people trying to have trouble getting simple things like gloves, hand sanitizer, aprons, all that sort of thing. We have been struggling to get it, so it'll be interesting to see how they distribute it.
The PSA union says the move to fast-track supplies to these priority workers is the right decision. It says without the equipment, the Ministry of Health is putting both union members and clients at risk. For Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell, TNA.
Walkers out for their daily exercise are getting to grips with the new etiquette of social distancing. But everything isn't as easy as it seems. From being shouted at by neighbours to avoiding the busiest of public spaces, the first few days of the lockdown has been eventful for many. Harry Locke reports.
Going for the daily walk and getting that fresh air has become the highlight of the day for many people. Up here near the top of Mount Victoria in Wellington, there's been a steady trickle of people heading up to the lookout, trying to avoid cabin fever. For all those trapped inside, it's the best way to break up the day of moving from the sofa to the kitchen, to the dining table and back to the sofa. But the new rule around keeping 2 metres distance is catching people out, and it's provoking some tense moments. KJ Smith, who lives in Hataitai, was looking forward to going for her daily walk. But just as she left her house, she accidentally stumbled across a couple.
This woman was kind of standing on the other side of my gate, and as I walked out, she went, "Oi, oi, 2 metres, God!"
And I was just quite shocked. I was like, I didn't know you were there. No need to yell at me. And then the guy that she was with, he muttered something about, obviously some people. I didn't hear what he said after that.
She says she kept her head down and kept walking. But it shows the new dilemma. Fellow walkers want an excuse to stop and chat, and now obstacles to be avoided. And none are trickier than families with small kids, or worse, an adorable pup.
You've got kids who will just kind of ride past you and not that far away, and you've got dogs who come up to you. Like, I had a dog come up to me the other day, and, I love dogs, so I was like, I can't pet you, I'm really sorry. And there's quite a lot of people out, like at the moment. So, yeah, maybe that kind of contributes to people's stress.
So while there are some tense moments, social media is also sharing stories of high levels of preparedness. From the story of a family of 3 kids stretched across a path who were called to snap back into bubble formation as others approached, to the runner out with her children who issued the command to me to get everyone in close. These experiences are new for everyone, and caution is rightly being exercised. Lance Wiggs says he was out for a walk with his daughter, heading towards the viaduct in Auckland, but decided against it when he got there.
I just didn't feel that there was enough ability for me to keep my social distance from people. One of my biggest concerns was the number of older people there, over 60, over 70, and perhaps even more, and generally not really seeming to understand the gravity of what they needed to do to keep their social distance.
He says not only the number of people, but the number of bikes there was also too much for him. The rules of the pavement are still being worked out, and Police Commissioner Mike Bush has indicated the police are considering stepping into public spaces if they become too crowded. Currently, they're relying on people exercising sensible judgment while also exercising their bodies. The Chief Executive of Walking Access New Zealand, Rick Cullinane, says people need to make sure they completely avoid paths where you are physically unable to keep a suitable distance apart.
I think we can all manage 2 metre spacing outside in the street, in the park and on the beach. But outdoors, on bush tracks or out and about in the wilderness, then it's just not feasible to guarantee a 2 metre physical distance in that environment. And so that sort of activity is just not available.
Getting used to such measures will take some time. As Mr. Cullinane says, no one said this was going to be convenient or easy. But it pays to remember no one is used to this, and we're all just finding our feet. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
So much feedback on this one. This person says our bubble includes 2 adults, twin 5-year-olds and twin 3-year-olds. People have always given us a pretty wide berth, and since the lockdown, people usually cross the street when they see us. Someone else says when walking around the ring path in Cornwall Park, and Aucklanders will understand what's going on here, everyone should walk clockwise so you don't constantly cross paths with other bubbles. Makes perfect sense, they say. Kim from Evans Bay in Wellington says, when the bubble is on the move, which is 2 of them, we walk single file when other bubbles approach or we cross the road or swing out wide. Now, the problem with that is the dog poo on the berm. Kim, you've got to watch out for that one. Someone else says we go single file unless the other guy beats us to it. Also, chairs with wheels get priority treatment. Anyone with a walking aid, carrying a baby or shopping, etc. Awkward moment today involving a car backing out of a driveway, pedestrian bubble stopping on one side, bike riding down the road, all a bit complex, but everybody froze, trying to let all the others pass by at a safe distance. Decent folk, total strangers. Someone else says, please ask dog owners to keep their dogs on the leash in all areas. They can cuddle or pat their dogs, but I do not want their dog jumping on me. And they go on to say, are they happy that their dog's sharing hair germs with others and other dog owners? With about 5 exclamation marks. And this person says, exercise etiquette, mirror the road rules and stick to the left. Come to a complete halt at intersections and be cautious if you see kids because they might not follow the road rules. Someone in my area has put some handmade signs on the bus stops which say, keep left is best when you leave the nest. And someone else says, it seems a bit bizarre, but when I'm out walking, in order to keep my distance, I have to walk on the road while adult cyclists bike on the footpath. Keep it going. We'd love to hear how you're adapting to the new etiquette rules when you're out there getting your daily walk or bike ride. Others have got in contact about supermarket abuse. This one has really got you annoyed. Someone says, I asked a young checkout girl, I think they were 16, if people were being kind. She said mostly, but she'd been yelled at by a woman who didn't believe she had to pack her own bags. It made me angry hearing this. People need to be calm and kind. Someone else says, I really felt for the supermarket worker. No one should experience such abuse. What puzzles me is that the supermarket representative says it's taking really good care of its workers. The other day, we heard they were paying an extra 10% over the minimum wage they get. Listening to the supermarket worker and what the staff are putting up with, that must just feel like a kick in the teeth. And Ivan has got in touch to say, checkout operators are not 2 metres from customers and the screens are only 1 mil wide. All staff should have masks given. Staff that are in proximity to customers should have masks. And Ivan says he hopes that the companies deliver on the masks because we're hearing that some of them are getting shipments this week. On meat dumping for independents, Annalise says no to food dumping. Send any food to food banks and distribute it to poor communities street by street.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. A second nurse has tested positive for COVID-19 at Queenstown's Lakes District Hospital. The Southern DHB says all 74 people who work at the hospital will now have to be tested. It says the nurse was one of 15 close contacts of another nurse who tested positive yesterday. Close contacts of both the cases have to isolate themselves, but casual contacts can still work at the hospital. The DHB says its emergency department will remain open, but the maternity ward will move to another building. The criteria for COVID-19 testing have been relaxed as the government wants to increase rates across the country. MPs were told today being in lockdown isn't enough to eradicate the virus, but more action is needed on testing, contact tracing and quarantine controls. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The government has been defending the number of tests being done each day, saying it stacks up well compared to other countries. About 21,300 tests have been done so far, with a capacity now to do about 3,500 a day. But the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says not enough is being done to get a true picture of what's happening, including the rate of community transmission, currently estimated at between 1% and 2%. Testing criteria have now been relaxed, so people do not have to have the travel history or known close contact to be eligible. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
A supermarket worker has described irate customers spitting, swearing and throwing things at staff. The woman, who wants to remain anonymous, told Checkpoint the abuse seems to be getting worse as the COVID-19 lockdown continues.
I had a male come in. He threw a basket at me because there was nothing on the shelf, and I went home crying that day.
A supermarket checkout supervisor. Personal protective equipment like masks will be given to frontline care workers to help them feel more safe during the coronavirus pandemic. Current Health Ministry guidelines are that masks are not needed unless staff are dealing with confirmed or suspected cases of COVID-19. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says handing out the masks doesn't contradict those guidelines. Dr Bloomfield says frontline workers' concerns have been heard. More people, including in-home and disability support workers, as well as staff from non-government organisations and pharmacies, will get the masks. Community newspapers servicing hard-to-reach areas and can prove they can deliver safely should now be able to keep operating. Non-daily papers were not considered an essential service, but ministers have reviewed the rules after pushback from some outlets. Ministers have given an exemption to papers for remote rural communities, which may not have full access to the internet, or those serving non-English speaking communities. The Prime Minister says public health remains the top priority.
It is a decision that a very limited number of publications, which can demonstrate they fill an unmet need and can also show they have appropriate health and safety measures in place to minimise the transmission of COVID-19 during production and delivery, will be approved as essential.
Jacinda Ardern says ministers expect delivery will be made through existing networks like New Zealand Post, supermarkets and dairies. Business confidence has slumped to near record lows as the COVID-19 virus begins to hit hard. ANZ Bank's monthly business confidence survey shows sentiment plunged to a net 64% pessimism, with all key activity indicators sliding. The more closely followed measure of firms' view of their own outlook has fallen to a record net 27%, saying things will get worse over the next 12 months. ANZ's chief economist, Sharon Zollner, expects things to get worse before they get better.
The latter sample in the latter half of the month was more negative than the first half, and that's not surprising because, of course, the country went into full lockdown over that period. So based on that, we would expect that, we haven't found the bottom yet.
Ms. Zollner says the slide in confidence is dreadful and points to a severe recession. A former justice of the peace who paid Filipino families to exploit their children online has been granted parole at his first hearing. Martin Henry Laws, who used to be the chairman of the Takapuna local board, was sentenced to 4 years and 6 months in jail in September 2018. Jill Bonnet reports.
Martin Laws directed the online abuse by typing instructions, and he then recorded the footage. The 76-year-old had a parole hearing a fortnight ago, which ordered that he could be released yesterday. His final release date would have been 2023. The multimillionaire's parole conditions include not associating with anyone aged under 16 or using the internet without written probation approval and attending a psychological assessment. Jill Bonnet, Aho.
And that's the news.
This is a COVID-19 official government announcement. Most New Zealanders are staying at home and doing the right thing. If you're concerned about people breaking level 4 restrictions, you can report this to the police at 105.police.govt.nz. Save supermarket home delivery slots for those who need them. If you're going to the supermarket, plan ahead. Check out covid19.govt.nz for more tips on shopping for essentials. If you have concerns about high prices at supermarkets, you can report these to Pricewatch at imbi.govt.nz. That's Pricewatch at mbie.govt.nz. Stay at home. Break the chain. Save lives.
Now the short forecast from Met Service taking us to midnight tomorrow, Wednesday, updated just over an hour ago. Northland to Whanganui, including Coromandel Peninsula. Fine apart from isolated afternoon showers, patches of fog during the morning and evening. Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumarunui. Fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers today. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Taihape. Fine spells, scattered showers this afternoon and evening. Some heavy, possible thunderstorms. Manawatu to Wellington, fine spells, isolated showers. Clearing up this evening. Waitarapa, a few showers, possible thunderstorms, easing tomorrow. Marlborough, Canterbury, North Otago and Dunedin, fine spells with isolated afternoon showers inland, areas of morning and evening low cloud. For the rest of the South Island, long fine spells, isolated showers about the ranges this afternoon and evening, occasional drizzle for the Chatham Islands. It's 6.5 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Paul. Welcome back. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Despite the drop in COVID-19 cases over the past week, the Director-General of Health says they will continue to rise. Today, the numbers jumped to 647 in total after 58 new confirmed and probable cases were announced. This includes a second nurse at Queenstown's Lakes District Hospital. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says even though there are fewer numbers confirmed, New Zealand is not out of the woods yet.
I have no sense that this is a drop overall, and our expectation is that the number of cases will continue to increase. The number of cases may reflect that there were lower numbers of tests done on Sunday in particular, and that's what we're seeing come through. Our full expectation is that the number of cases will continue to increase over the coming 7 to 10 days.
Ashley Bloomfield says couriers are also less frequent on Sunday, which could have contributed to the lower numbers. He says if level 4 is adhered to, the number of new cases each day should fall after that 7 to 10 day period. But in the meantime, hospitals are still seeing cases in general and ICU wards.
There are 14 people in hospital currently with COVID-19 in a range of hospitals across the country, the details of which will be on our website. I can tell you that 2 people are in intensive care, both are stable.
But Dr Bloomfield says modelling released today paints a grim picture on what COVID-19 could do if the country wasn't in lockdown.
they paint a sobering picture of what the impact of COVID-19 would be in Aotearoa, New Zealand, if we were not taking a very decisive and strict approach to our response. That is the implementation of the Alert Level 4 measures. So without the actions currently being taken, the uncontrolled spread of COVID-19 would clearly exact a high price on New Zealand in terms of its impact on our healthcare system, on our healthcare workers, and of course, in a large number of deaths.
Ashley Bloomfield says the case definition for COVID-19 has been revised and widened to help find cases of community transmission. The technical advisory group met and has made plans to change the criteria people need to meet to be tested. Dr. Bloomfield says they are looking to expand the testing so that an overseas travel history or contact with a confirmed case would not be the only requirements.
I specifically asked them to look at the definition, given that we now have evidence of some community transmission. The key thing I wanted them to look at is whether we decouple the symptoms that form part of the definition from the requirement to have a travel history or to have been a close contact of a confirmed or probable case.
Ashley Bloomfield says people who didn't meet all the criteria are already able to be tested if clinical judgment thinks it's necessary. And while Civil Defence is mostly happy with our behaviour, Director Sarah Stewart-Black says we could be doing more. She says people need to stop congregating in parks and beaches, and parents need to stop taking their children to playgrounds. She says the Kiwi tradition of passing something over the fence to the neighbour is also a no-no, as is flushing wet wipes.
Unfortunately, disposing of wet wipes down the toilet leads to extra blockages in the sewer network, and this includes flushable wet wipes. So the bottom line is, if you'll beg my forgiveness, please always put wet wipes in the rubbish and not in the toilet.
The message is still the same. The better people adhere to level 4 lockdown and physical distancing, the better off New Zealand will be. Scientists around the world have been racing to develop treatments, cures and a vaccine for COVID-19 and are getting closer by the day. Jacob Glanville, who's one of the stars of Netflix documentary Pandemic, runs Distributed Bio, which has been working to find an antibody therapy. Yesterday, he tweeted we should get ready for a positive announcement. Excuse me. This week, and he joins me via Skype from San Francisco now. Hello, Jacob. We could do with some good news, so what can you tell us?
Well, thanks for having me on. So I'm happy to report that my team has successfully taken 5 antibodies that back in 2002 were determined to bind and neutralize, so block and stop the SARS virus. And we've evolved them in our laboratory so that now they very, very vigorously block and stop the CoV-2 virus as well. So this makes them suitable medicines that one could use once they've gone through human testing to treat the virus.
So you have confirmed already that these antibodies that you've isolated work against COVID-19. In what way?
So the way we've confirmed it is we've taken these old antibodies. We know exactly where they bind on the virus, and they know they block SARS. The new virus is a cousin of the old SARS. So what we've done is we've created hundreds of millions of versions of those antibodies where we've mutated them a bit. And in that pool of mutant versions, we found versions that cross them over. So now we know that they bind on the same spot of the new virus, the COVID-19 virus, and it binds the spot that the virus uses to gain entry into your cells. So it blocks that. At this point, we know it binds the same spot extremely tightly with high affinity. And the next step is we send the antibodies to the military, and they will directly put those on the virus and show that it blocks its ability to infect cells.
So you don't do that. Why does the military do that?
Because we don't want to have COVID-19 in our laboratory, and we do not want to have SARS in our laboratory. The other nice thing about it is you want the stamp of approval of a governmental military to independently test your work. This is one of the foundations of good science.
So do you think you're the first ones to find these antibodies?
No, there's a couple of good groups that are working on this. So there's 3 types of medicine: vaccines, pills that are being repurposed, or antibodies. Antibodies are attractive because you can give them to a patient right when they're in the hospital, like an antiviral. That you can also give them to doctors. You could give them to the elderly, people to prevent them from getting sick. So there are a couple other groups working on it. Part of the reason we think we're moving pretty fast is that instead of starting from scratch, discovering an antibody, we went to these existing antibodies that were already extremely well characterized against SARS, and we've adapted them. So we're piggybacking on 2 years of research.
So can you just explain to people in simple terms how this would be used? So would you need to be infected in order for it to assist you in any way, or would you take it sort of like a short-term vaccine?
Yeah, it's sort of like a short-term vaccine, except it works immediately. A vaccine could take 6 to 8 weeks to take effect, where this is going to take effect within 20 minutes. You could either give it to a patient who's sick, who is experiencing COVID-19, and then within 20 minutes of receiving the shot, their body's flooded with those antibodies. Those antibodies will go surround and stick all over a virus and make it so it's no longer infectious. You could also give it to, let's say, a doctor or a nurse or an elderly person, and they would then have those antibodies in them, and that would protect them from getting infected in the first place.
How long would that last for, Jacob?
Yeah, so that's the disadvantage compared to a vaccine. A vaccine might give you a year or multiple years of protection. This is going to give you more like 8 to 10 weeks of protection. Eventually, those antibodies deteriorate, and you need to get another shot.
Okay, so it goes off to the military, the work that you have done so far, and it gets tested. How long potentially does that take, and what is the next step? Is the next step testing it with human subjects?
That's right, yeah. So there's a couple steps. The testing for neutralization, so testing it with virus, that's actually pretty quick. The other thing that we do is we send the samples to a laboratory, a Charles River Laboratories, and they're going to do safety and tox. They're going to do a series of tests to make sure that the medicine looks safe on human tissue, samples, everything you can do before actually giving it to a person to say that this looks clean and safe to give to people. You also have to scale up production. We use very exacting manufacturing standards called GMP for making a medicine, and that can take multiple months. Once that material is ready, we go into a human trial, and that's a phase 1/2 trial where you give it to a series of 400 to 600 people who are in hospitals experiencing symptoms, and then you watch over the next 5 to 10 days to see whether it helped or not.
Is there any way of safely speeding that process up?
We are doing everything we can to speed this process up. I'll tell you the things we've already done, but I'll also just be sobering that this does take time. We have saved potentially years of research by piggybacking on the SARS antibodies, and our technology is very good at engineering these things to cross, and we've succeeded in doing that. The next step, the big time-consuming part, is the GMP manufacture. Traditionally, that takes 9 to 12 months. Obviously, we can't wait that long, so we've worked with 2 different partners to try to accelerate that to take a few months, but that does take time, and there's really no way around. And you kind of want these checks and balances to make sure the material you're producing is sufficiently high quality that it's safe to put into a person. Once that's in place, you have to run a phase 1/2 study, and that's checking to make sure that it's safe in a person, that doesn't cause any harm to people who receive it, and second, that it's effective, that it's actually a useful medicine. And so those experiments do need to be conducted.
So let's assume for a minute that all goes swimmingly well, right? So what is the earliest possible time we might expect this to be available to use?
So assuming that we're able to complete our study at the end of summer, the phase 1/2, and it looks good, then we would use something called compassionate use. And this is it was used in the Ebola crisis, and it's been used in other cases where if you have something that's effective and there's no other good medicine, you can begin releasing it to the world for use prior to going through all the approval process. That could be as early as September. Unfortunately, that's also as far away as September. And so that's as fast as we can conceive of having this medicine widely available.
So what happens once you go through that? Who owns this? And will we in New Zealand get access to it, or who gets it first?
Yeah, so the idea is it's essential for us that everyone gains access to it. So as we set up the phase 1/2 study in the United States, we're also creating a war room to have conversations with the European Commission, with interests in Asia, and we'd need to talk with New Zealand as well, and make sure that the studies that are being conducted are minimum but sufficient for every nation to be able to receive the medicine. There's also considerations on we need to produce enough for about 600 doses for the phase 1/2, but my feeling is that we should also, in anticipation that study looks good, and antibodies usually work well for this kind of purpose, we should start scaling up a lot more doses, hundreds of thousands to millions, for the next step. And governments should pay for that. They should be willing to bite the bullet and say the cost of all of our lives and the economy is so much greater than the additional cost of scaling up in anticipation that medicine works, that they should sponsor that work.
What do you think the cost of that is?
Well, it's, trillions of dollars to the annual economy, and then there's our lives, which are priceless.
So I want to ask you a few other questions. As a pandemic expert, we here in New Zealand right now are in lockdown. Only essential workers are supposed to be allowed out. You're supposed to stay in your bubble, as we call it here, your family unit at home. Is this effective in terms of eliminating the virus, or is it only effective as long as we stay in lockdown?
Okay, so here I've got some interesting and hopefully some good news. In particular, New Zealand has an advantage as, a two-island nation. You have a moat, and that is helpful. So what happens when you do lockdown or shelter in place, which is the same thing that they instituted here in California, is you're asking everyone to go back to their homes. And when you're doing that, you're turning every home into a little quarantine. And so you can imagine it's almost like sending out 1,000 ships and they're all not quite touching each other. And the advantage of this is imagine there's 4 people in every home. People go there. If they're not infected, those people are protected from getting infected. They're contacting less people. If someone is in the house infected, they could infect up to 4 other people. But at that point, they all start getting better. And then once you get better, most people are going to get immunity, so they won't get affected again. And that means that if you have everyone stuck in their homes, you're slowing the spread, most of the cases resolve. And then when you release people back out, there's way less active cases, which means the new sets of cases are slowed.
So Jacob, we're getting a little bit of herd immunity in a controlled environment, as well as stopping the spread.
Yeah, what happens when everyone leaves their homes again and you can resume normal life, you have a lot less active cases because most of the cases have burnt out. Unfortunately, people don't follow rules well, so you're never going to get 100% blockage, but you can slow things down. And in particular, because New Zealand doesn't have that many active cases yet, rapid isolation of this class, followed by very aggressive testing when you reintroduce everyone back out of their homes, could be a method to help really suppress the outbreak. And that is really a strategy that is, given how infectious this is probably the most effective strategy for most nations, is try to suppress it as much as possible and just mitigate the growth of infections until a decent medicine pops up.
So obviously we're really deeply concerned about community transmission here in New Zealand at the moment and tracking cases. Should countries do random testing of general populations in order to locate community transmissions that they would otherwise not know about?
Well, South Korea did that, and it was very effective. It depends a little bit on your capacity for high-throughput testing. If high-throughput testing was unconstrained, they should treat it like the census, and they should go out to every home when everyone's sheltering in place, and they should determine which homes are infected and which are not. They, in fact, should do another test that you're not hearing about a lot, and that is a serology test to see the people who have immunity and are no longer at risk. But they're not running that one yet because there aren't that many people infected. But not every nation has enough tests to do that. So in the United States, as an example, we don't have the luxury of being able to test everyone. So those tests are being restricted more towards medical staff to protect them. And also you don't want medical staff who are sick in front of patients. And then people that are showing strong symptoms. There's an inflection point. For New Zealand, it would make sense to more aggressively test because few people have it. And so therefore, it's more valuable to identify a case and then isolate them, do contact tracing, which is a very effective technique that we've used to stop Ebola from ever becoming global.
Tell me a little bit more about this test that checks your immunity.
Yeah, so it's the same test you could use. You go to the hospital routinely, and they try to see if you're up to date on your booster shots or you've been infected. What they do is they take a little bit of your serum, and then they go check to see if you have serum antibodies against a particular pathogen. So such tests can be done for COVID-19 as well. And what they do is they would tell you, even if a person never experienced symptoms, it would tell you whether that person likely was infected previously. This is actually the first test that's also done for like HIV, this is a common test. It looks like it can be set up to resemble a pregnancy test, a lateral flow test, and that could be done easily. The reason you don't see so many of those out there yet is that we still have relatively few people who actually have gone through the disease and developed immunity. But as more and more people are infected, that's going to be an important thing to know because the people who are protected, they no longer need to worry about being sick. They could be safely working out in the food service industry or working with medical staff, and then they can just help other people more once they've kind of passed to the other side of the danger of COVID-19.
So I'm just wondering how realistic, there's discussion about this in New Zealand today, how realistic is it to aim for complete elimination in a country of our size, do you think?
It's extremely difficult to contemplate doing that because this virus is very infectious. It can have a long incubation period, like 14 days or more inside some individuals who are infectious while they're not showing symptoms. And there's a proportion of the population that are not symptomatic. And so, and even in those individuals, there's also a problem where they seem like they don't have that much virus reliably in their nostrils. So when you do these viremia tests, they sometimes show up negative for someone who later showed to be positive. All of those things together make it a bit of a Trojan horse where it's hiding out within people. I think you can mitigate, you can suppress, you can limit the spread, and you can case isolate. But in absence of doing like census-like testing of every single home and not letting anyone in or out of the country, it's difficult to contemplate completely stopping the virus from popping up over and over again.
Well, it's funny that you raise that because I'm also interested in your thoughts on border control. So at the moment, we're practically in complete lockdown here in terms of international tourists. We're letting our own citizens come back and permanent residents. If we wanted to ring fence ourselves, would we, in essence, have to keep a closed border until we get antibodies from you or a vaccine from somebody else?
Okay, so in theory, if this seems improbable to me to be possible, but if New Zealand decided to let no one in or out and they checked every single home, like in theory, it is possible to eventually suppress this, provided that there isn't high school students that are passing along without even realizing they're sick and they're sneaking out of their windows to go hang out with each other. Like this is the problem of humans don't adhere to rules. But in theory, you could actually squash things and then basically hang out in New Zealand, the moat, and protect yourselves. It's theoretically possible, but just given human behavior and the needs of global economy, I suspect it is unlikely.
And would require some extreme measures and human compliance.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Really appreciate your time. It's a pleasure to talk to you, Jacob, and best of luck. Hopefully we'll check back in with you when you're a little further down the process. That is Jacob Glanville joining us via Skype there to talk about the work that his company is doing in looking for antibodies to help fight COVID-19 and giving us, well, basically a world exclusive there. He's moving to the next step of the process. It is 25 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. There are now more than 750,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 around the world. The World Health Organization says 37,815 people have died of the virus, while more than 165,000 others have recovered. France has recorded its highest daily death toll. Over 400 people have died there in the past 24 hours. In Australia, the state of Victoria has banned gun and ammunition sales after the number of licence applications doubled since the COVID-19 pandemic was declared. People who can prove they need ammunition and guns for occupational purposes will still be able to buy them. And New South Wales police have ordered a number of cruise ships away from the country's east coast. Police Commissioner Mick Fuller says the ships don't have a port in Australia and need to move on. 11 Australians have been taken off 9 ships over the past few days. In the United States, a hospital ship has sailed into the New York harbour, ready for COVID-19 victims as the city's health system struggles to deal with the number of people presenting with virus symptoms. The BBC's Nader Tawfiq has more.
Sailing into New York Harbor, the naval hospital ship Comfort is ready for battle. The city's deepening war against the coronavirus is just weeks from its peak, so it's all hands on deck on this floating hospital with 1,000 beds and 12 operating rooms. Non-coronavirus patients will be sent here to take the stress off of overwhelmed hospitals.
Our nation has heard our plea for help here in New York City, and there could not be a better example of all of America pulling for New York City than the arrival of the USNS Comfort. It's a major moment in this long battle that we will be fighting against the coronavirus.
President Donald Trump is now urging people to play by the rules and observe distancing procedure after earlier suggesting guidelines could be lifted before Easter.
Peak, the highest point of death rates, remember this, is likely to hit in 2 weeks. Nothing would be worse than declaring victory before the victory is won. That would be the greatest loss of all. Therefore, the next 2 weeks and during this period, it's very important that everyone strongly follow the guidelines.
In the UK, the world's biggest hospital is about to open to treat COVID-19 patients. It's a field hospital with the capacity for more than 4,000 people. The BBC's Hugh Pym is in London.
Just a week ago, it was a giant conference hall with room for a dozen football pitches. Now it's a hospital with intensive care beds and ventilators and ready in a few days' time to receive the first patients. The capacity eventually will be 4,000, and if those beds are used, it'll be the biggest hospital in the world. Sir Simon Stevens, head of NHS England, toured the site at London's XL Centre today as it was announced the number of patients was increasing by 1,000 a day.
Today there are over 9,000 positive coronavirus patients in hospitals across England, and we know that number is only going to increase.
And in India, 1.3 billion people are in lockdown. But many who are facing financial hardship are now walking back to their villages from the country's mega cities, looking for work and food. Some are saying it's the biggest movement of people on the subcontinent since partition in 1947. Diya Arya reports from New Delhi.
Panic and chaos. These people who have moved across this vast country for work demand they be allowed to go home. A complete lockdown has meant they have no work and no money. In the country's capital, Delhi, the desperate head for their faraway villages on foot. Journeys so grueling, some won't make it home. At least 6 people have died en route. Others scramble onto buses, trying to get out however they can. To curb the movement of people, borders between Indian states are sealed overnight. But some, like Wajid Khan and his wife, insist they will march to their village.
What can the government do? My son is sick. If they really cared, they wouldn't have stopped people from coming out or stopped transport. Now if he dies by the time we reach, who will take responsibility?
And that is all we've got time for this evening. Thanks for tuning in, and thank you so much for all your feedback tonight. Sorry we couldn't get to all of it. Don't forget you can check back on our stories online and look for the video pieces as well. Our news team will keep you up to date and we'll be back tomorrow.
Now, RNZ headlines at 6:30. 74 workers at Queenstown's hospital are to be tested after a second nurse has shown positive for COVID-19. Home support workers are relieved they'll get essential protective gear when visiting clients. Butchers say up to $5 million of chilled meat could be dumped if they're not allowed to reopen within the next 5 days. Fonterra is expecting the milk price to remain steady after a spike in international demand for many of its products. And a former JP who paid Filipino families to exploit their children online has been granted parole at his first hearing. Those are the latest news headlines. Our next news will be at 7 and then...
Tonight on Nights, Auckland Councillor Josephine Bartley on ensuring the homeless also have a home to shelter in during the COVID lockdown. Wanaka GP Paul Johns. He's one of the people not isolating at home, although the challenge